welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I was halfway through my shift when my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. Another emergency alert. Emergency alert. Do not walk alone. Stay in groups. Avoid empty streets. I furrowed my brow, glancing at the timestamp. 1:42 a.m. The government had been sending these out for the past 3 nights. No explanation, no details, just the same ominous warning urging people to stay together. I sighed and tapped my phone screen to clear the notification. At first, I thought it was some weird citywide curfew test, but then the news started reporting on the disappearances. I turned my chair toward the hospital security monitors, my eyes skimming over the various camera feeds. The ER entrance, the waiting area, the halls leading toward the ICU. Everything was quiet, as expected for this late hour. Another one? I looked up to see Marissa, one of the overnight nurses, peering over my desk with a raised eyebrow. She must have seen my reaction to the alert. "Yeah," I said. "Third night in a row." She clicked her tongue and shook her head. "It's freaking weird. You hear about that guy who went missing by the train station?" I frowned. "What guy?" "Patient came in earlier tonight," she said, lowering her voice. "Told me his friend vanished, like, right in front of him. Said they were walking near the station, and when he looked back, his buddy was just gone." A chill crawled up my spine. "Cops are all over it," she added, "but no signs of a struggle. No witnesses. Just missing." I leaned back in my chair. "And this happened while they were walking alone?" She nodded. I glanced back at my phone, suddenly uneasy. The warnings weren't just paranoia. Something was happening. By the time my shift ended at 2 a.m., I had almost convinced myself the whole thing was blown out of proportion. People went missing all the time in the city, right? Maybe this was just a coincidence. Still, the warning clung to the back of my mind as I grabbed my jacket and stepped outside. The night was cold and eerily still. The hospital parking lot stretched out before me, mostly empty, except for a few scattered vehicles. My car was parked 2 blocks away, in a public lot near a 24-hour diner. Normally, I wouldn't have thought twice about walking alone, but now I tightened my grip on my bag and started moving. The city felt too quiet. Streetlights buzzed faintly overhead, their glow casting long, distorted shadows on the pavement. The only sounds were my own footsteps echoing off the empty buildings. Halfway down the block, I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the latest headlines. Authorities investigating multiple disappearances. Victims last seen walking alone. Police urge residents to follow emergency alerts. I swallowed hard. I was almost to the parking lot when a sound made me stop. Footsteps, not mine. I turned sharply, my breath catching in my throat. The street behind me was empty. No movement. No one there. I exhaled, shaking my head. "Calm down. You're being paranoid." Quicken my pace. Tap, tap, tap. The footsteps followed. My chest tightened. They weren't echoing mine, they were slightly out of sync. Just a half step behind. I gritted my teeth and kept walking, forcing myself not to look back. Do not acknowledge them. That was part of the alert, wasn't it? I suddenly wished I had paid more attention. The parking lot was just ahead. If I could make it to my car. A sudden vibration in my hand made me flinch. My phone screen lit up. "Emergency alert. You are alone. Do not look behind you. Keep moving." My blood ran cold. This wasn't the same automated warning from before. It was different, and worse, it was directed at me. A terrible, suffocating feeling settled in my chest. My instincts screamed at me to turn around, to confirm there was nothing there, but every nerve in my body told me that if I did, I wouldn't like what I saw. I broke into a full sprint. The footsteps matched my speed. I reached my car, yanking the door handle with trembling hands. I threw myself inside and slammed the lock down just as a shadow moved in my peripheral vision. I barely caught a glimpse of it in the rearview mirror. Tall. Wrong. I blinked, and it was gone. My phone buzzed again. Emergency alert. Stay inside. Do not walk alone. I sat there, heart hammering, gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline. I wasn't sure I could ever walk alone again. I sat in my car for almost 10 minutes before I could force myself to move. The parking lot was empty, silent. The streetlights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly. The glow from my phone screen was the only source of light inside the car. I kept staring at the emergency alert, my mind stuck in a loop. You are alone. Do not look behind you. Keep moving. Something had been there. I knew I had seen it, even if it was just for a second. A tall, shifting shadow in my rearview mirror. The moment I had blinked, it was gone. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. Every instinct told me to get the hell out of here, but a part of me, the logical part, was still scrambling for an explanation. Maybe I was exhausted. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Or maybe the emergency alerts were real. I exhaled shakily and started the car. The radio clicked on, static filling the speakers before settling on some late-night talk show. Latest in a string of disappearances. Authorities are urging residents to stay indoors after dark and avoid walking alone. Officials have not released details on the nature of these incidents, but sources claim. I turned it off. I didn't want to hear more. I just wanted to go home. The drive back to my apartment was quiet. The city streets, usually filled with late-night stragglers, were nearly deserted. Maybe people were finally listening to the warnings. By the time I pulled into my complex's parking lot, I was starting to convince myself I had overreacted. The human brain played tricks in the dark, right? I had just spooked myself with all the talk of disappearances. I climbed out of the car and hurried inside, not daring to look over my shoulder. I didn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, I swore I could hear faint footsteps. Not in my room, but just beyond it, pacing, waiting. When my alarm blared at 6 p.m., I woke up drenched in sweat. My muscles ached from how tense I had been all night. I groggily checked my phone. A new emergency alert had come in while I slept. Emergency alert. Remain indoors after dark. If you must travel, do not be alone. Beneath it was a news notification. Another disappearance reported, local man missing after walking alone late at night. I stared at the words, my stomach twisting into knots. It was real. Something was happening to people who walked alone at night. And last night, I had almost been one of them. I tried to push the thoughts away as I got ready for work. There was something oddly comforting about my routine. Showering, getting dressed, brewing coffee. Normal, everyday tasks. By the time I arrived at the hospital, the sun had already set. The overnight staff greeted me with tired nods as I settled into the security office. Everything was normal. Almost. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that I had stepped too close to something I wasn't supposed to see. The hospital security cameras flickered slightly as I cycled through the feeds. Our entrance. ICU hallway. Staff lounge. Nothing unusual. Then a voice snapped me out of my thoughts. You okay, man? I looked up to see Sam, one of the other security guards, standing in the doorway. He had a coffee in one hand, a half-eaten granola bar in the other. Yeah, I said automatically. Just tired. He eyed me. You sure? You look like you saw a ghost. I hesitated. You been getting those emergency alerts? His expression darkened. Yeah, hard to ignore them. I leaned forward, lowering my voice. You believe them? Sam took a slow sip of coffee before answering. I don't know, man, but I do know something's wrong. He nodded toward the cameras. You notice how empty the streets are lately? People are scared. I thought back to the quiet roads on my way here. The empty parking lots. Yeah, I muttered. I noticed. Sam sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Look, just be careful, all right? And don't, BZZT. We both flinched as our phones vibrated at the same time. Another emergency alert. I pulled out my phone and read the message, my throat tightening. Emergency alert. Do not walk alone. If you hear footsteps, do not acknowledge them. Do not stop moving. Sam cursed under his breath. Jesus, it's getting worse. Before I could respond, a loud bang echoed from outside the security office. We both turned sharply. The sound had come from the ER entrance. I switched the security feed to the emergency room doors. A single figure stood outside, just beyond the hospital's automatic sliding doors. A man, mid-30s, dressed in a rumpled jacket and jeans. His hair was disheveled, and his eyes were wide, too wide. Something was wrong. I turned up the audio on the security feed. The man was muttering to himself. I leaned in, trying to make out the words. Don't turn around. Don't turn around. Don't turn around. My blood ran cold. I grabbed the intercom mic. Sir, are you all right? The man flinched at the sound of my voice, his entire body jerking like a puppet on strings. His head twitched slightly, like he wanted to look behind him but was forcing himself not to. Then, slowly, he raised his trembling hand and pointed to something. Not at the hospital, not at the cameras, at something behind him. But when I looked at the security feed, there was nothing there. I felt Sam stiffen beside me. The man let out a choked sob. It's still behind me. Then the camera feed glitched. Static filled the screen for less than a second. And when it cleared, the man was gone. Just like that, the hospital doors slid open slightly, as if responding to someone walking inside. But the entrance was empty. Sam and I sat frozen, staring at the screen. He finally spoke, voice barely above a whisper. What the hell was that? I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing for certain. He had been alone, and now he was gone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The security feed continued looping in eerie silence, showing nothing but the empty hospital entrance. The man who had been there, the one who had seen something, was just gone. Sam finally broke the silence. That didn't just happen. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Yeah, it did. He shook his head, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the floor. We need to call the cops. I hesitated. The police had already been investigating the disappearances. If they had answers, they weren't sharing them. But still, I reached for the desk phone and dialed. After a few rings, a woman's voice answered. 911, what's your emergency? I glanced at the security feed again. I felt ridiculous even saying it out loud, but there was a guy outside our hospital a minute ago. I said. He disappeared. A pause. Then, disappeared how? I turned to Sam, who just stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. He was standing outside the ER entrance, saying something about not turning around. Then the cameras glitched, and he was just gone. Another pause. Then, in a carefully measured tone, she asked, was he alone? My fingers tightened around the phone. Yes. The woman on the other end inhaled sharply, then said, stay where you are. Officers are on the way. The line went dead. I slowly set the phone down, my pulse hammering. She knew, Sam muttered. She didn't even ask for a description because she already knew what had happened. I turned back to the monitors, rewinding the security footage. Maybe the glitch had just been interference. Maybe he had just run off. But as I scrubbed back to the moment just before the screen cut out, I noticed something I hadn't before. A faint blur behind him. Not a shadow. Not a trick of the light. Something tall and wrong, standing in the darkness just beyond the range of the streetlights. And the moment the static hit, it moved. Then he was gone. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until Sam clamped a hand on my shoulder, making me jump. We need to check outside. I whipped around. Are you insane? We're security, he shot back. If someone vanished on hospital property, we have to investigate. I knew he was right, but stepping out there after what I'd just seen, every instinct screamed don't. Still, I couldn't ignore the sick feeling curling in my gut. Someone had disappeared right outside our doors. And if we didn't figure out what happened, who was next? We stepped outside together, the cold air cutting through my uniform. The hospital's automatic doors slid shut behind us, sealing us in the night. The parking lot was still. The only sound was the distant hum of traffic from a few streets away. No signs of a struggle. No blood. No dropped belongings. Just empty pavement. Sam walked ahead cautiously, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. I followed, keeping close. "This is insane," I muttered. "What are we even looking for?" "Something," he replied. "Anything." We reached the spot where the man had been standing. I half expected to find footprints or some other trace that he had ever been here. But there was nothing. Just as I was about to turn back, my phone vibrated. I pulled it out, my stomach twisting. Another emergency alert. "Do not speak. Do not look. Do not run." My breath caught in my throat. Then a footstep sounded behind me. Not Sam's. Something else. My entire body locked up. The air around us felt different, heavier. It was like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in an instant. I turned to Sam, my pulse pounding in my ears. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He gave a single, slow nod. His hand tightened around his flashlight. The footsteps came again, closer. They didn't echo like normal steps should have. They were too soft, too deliberate. We weren't alone. Sam raised the flashlight and aimed it toward the sound. Nothing was there, but we could hear it. Something moving, circling us. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, opening the camera app. If the security footage had picked up something, maybe my phone would too. I aimed it toward the darkness, slowly scanning the area. For a second, all I saw was an empty lot. The parked cars, the distant streetlights, then a shape. It was only visible for a moment, flickering on my phone screen like a glitch in reality itself. But I saw it, tall, gaunt, hollow eyes staring right at me. My breath hitched. The moment my eyes locked onto it, my phone vibrated violently. "Emergency alert. You looked. Do not move." I choked back a curse. My hands trembled as I lowered the phone. Sam was staring at me, eyes wide. "What?" I swallowed hard. "It's here." His grip tightened on the flashlight. "Where?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But I saw it on my phone." I risked a glance at the screen again, but the shape was gone. A wave of nausea rolled through me. I wanted to run. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to move, to get inside, to escape. But I couldn't, because the alert had told me not to. Sam must have realized the same thing. His jaw clenched. "What do we do?" he asked, barely above a whisper. I didn't have an answer, but the footsteps started again, closer. The sound wasn't coming from one direction anymore. It was circling us, behind us, to the left, to the right, behind again. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay still. Then the sound stopped. A terrible silence stretched between us. I felt something standing just behind me, close enough that I could feel the air shift. My skin crawled. It was waiting, testing me. Sam inhaled shakily. "On 3, he murmured. "We run." I wanted to scream. The alert said not to run. But then the hospital doors slammed open. A voice shouted from inside, "Get back in here." Sam and I bolted. I expected the footsteps to chase us, expected whatever thing had been behind us to lunge. But there was nothing. We crashed through the hospital doors, nearly knocking over a nurse. I turned, gasping. The parking lot was empty, like nothing had been there at all. But I knew the truth. It had been. And next time, it might not let us go. We stood just inside the hospital entrance, panting like we had run a marathon. The automatic doors slid shut behind us, sealing us inside. Sam bent over, hands on his knees, cursing under his breath. My own legs felt like jelly. I could still feel the presence of something standing behind me just moments ago. So close I had felt the air shift, like nothing had ever been there. The nurse who had shouted for us to get inside was staring, her brow furrowed. "What the hell were you two doing out there?" Sam glanced at me before answering. We thought we heard something." The lie tasted bitter in my mouth, but what else could we say? There was something invisible following us? Yeah, that would go over well. The nurse, Marissa, crossed her arms. "Well, you're lucky I saw you. I don't know what's going on lately, But people who go out alone at night, she hesitated. They don't come back, she knew. Maybe not the full details, but she knew something was happening. I steadied my breathing and pulled out my phone. The emergency alert from minutes ago was still on my screen. You looked. Do not move. I turned it toward Sam. Did you get this one? He pulled out his own phone and frowned. No. Mine still says, do not walk alone. If you hear footsteps, do not acknowledge them. My stomach twisted. Why had I gotten a different message? Before I could dwell on it, the sliding doors opened again, and 2 police officers stepped inside, a man and a woman, both wearing dark uniforms with serious expressions. I knew why they were here. One of them, a tall officer with a badge that read Ramirez, approached us. You called about a missing person? Sam and I exchanged a glance. I nodded. Yeah, a guy was standing right outside. He was talking to himself, saying something about not turning around. Then the cameras glitched, and he was just gone, Ramirez finished. His expression didn't change, like he had heard this before. A chill ran down my spine. The female officer, Carver, pulled out a notepad. Did either of you witness the disappearance directly? Sam hesitated. Not exactly, but we saw it on the security feed. Carver nodded, jotting something down. We'll need to review the footage. I led them back to the security office, my hands clammy. As I pulled up the camera logs, I tried to ignore the feeling gnawing at me. Something told me they weren't here to investigate. They were here to contain. I rewound the footage to the moment the man had stood outside. My finger hovered over the play button. Here, I said. This is where he... I hit play. The screen showed the empty entrance. I blinked. That wasn't right. I scrubbed back. The timestamp still showed the same moment, 10:43 p.m., the moment he had been standing there. But now there was nothing. No man. No flickering shadow behind him. Just an empty parking lot. A chill crawled up my spine. Wait, no. That's not. I rewound again, further this time. The footage before it was still there. Cars pulling in, a doctor stepping outside for a smoke. But when I fast-forwarded back to 10:43 p.m., a gap, not even static. Just nothing, like the footage had been erased, or like reality itself had been rewritten. Sam let out a low curse. You saw him, right? He turned to me, his voice laced with unease. You saw him on the feed earlier. I did, I whispered. I wasn't crazy. I saw him. Ramirez and Carver exchanged a glance. They weren't surprised. That's when I knew. They had seen this before. Ramirez sighed and tucked his notepad into his jacket. All right, he said. If you remember anything else, let us know. That's it, Sam asked. What about the missing guy? Carver offered a small, tired smile. We'll look into it. It was a lie. They weren't looking into anything. They were cleaning up. Ramirez nodded to me. Stay indoors after dark. And then they were gone. As soon as they left, Sam turned to me. Tell me you saw him earlier. I did, I said. He was right there. So where the hell did the footage go? I had no answer, but something inside me told me that whatever had happened outside, whatever took that man, it didn't just erase people. It erased evidence, like it had never happened at all. Sam and I sat in silence for a long time after that. I kept checking the cameras, scanning every corner of the hospital grounds. Nothing. Finally, Sam stood up. I need coffee. Yeah, I muttered. Me too. We left the security office together, heading toward the staff lounge. I felt safer with Sam next to me. Even though I didn't understand what was happening, I knew one thing: we couldn't be alone. We reached the lounge and poured ourselves coffee in paper cups with shaky hands. Sam broke the silence first. You think the cops know what's going on? I nodded. They knew before they even got here. He exhaled sharply. Yeah, that's what I thought. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated again. I glanced down. Emergency alert. Do not be alone. Do not speak to those who walk alone. My pulse spiked. Sam's phone buzzed at the same time. He pulled it out, frowning. Same message. I looked up at him, dread curdling in my stomach. What does that mean? He muttered. I don't know, I admitted. We stood there for a moment, both processing the new alert. Then a distant noise echoed down the hallway. Footsteps, slow, measured. Sam and I froze. The hospital was mostly quiet at this hour. The only people in this section were nurses on break, and they usually stuck to the lounge. These footsteps, they sounded wrong. I turned my head toward the open doorway. The hallway beyond was dim, lit only by emergency exit signs. The footsteps drew closer. Sam's grip tightened around his coffee cup. That's coming from the ICU wing. The ICU wing where most patients were asleep, where no one should be walking alone. I reached for my radio. Maybe it's just I stopped because someone was standing at the end of the hall. A figure, tall, motionless, facing away from us. It wasn't moving anymore, just standing. And then, in the dim emergency lighting, I saw it. The shadow was moving the wrong way. My mouth went dry. I grabbed Sam's arm, my fingers digging into his sleeve. "Don't speak," I whispered. The emergency alert had warned us. Do not speak to those who walk alone. Sam's breathing turned shallow. "We need to get out of here." The figure twitched. Then slowly it turned its head just slightly. Not all the way. Not enough to see its face, but enough to let us know. It knew we were there. The figure at the end of the hallway stood perfectly still, its back to us. The emergency exit lights cast long shadows across the floor, except the shadow moved the wrong way. It stretched toward the ceiling instead of the floor. It flickered slightly like a bad television signal, and I could feel it staring even though it hadn't turned around. Beside me, Sam barely breathed. I could tell he felt it too. The emergency alert's words screamed in my head. Do not speak to those who walk alone. And yet, some horrible instinct made me want to break the silence. To call out. To demand that the thing in front of us explain itself. I swallowed hard and forced myself to stay quiet. The figure didn't move. Not yet, but its shadow did. The flickering grew worse, twisting, stretching toward us even though the body stayed still. We had to go. I grabbed Sam's arm, barely daring to breathe. He nodded, gripping his radio in white-knuckled fingers. Slowly, so slowly, I took a step back. The shadow twitched, then turned its head. Not all the way. Not enough for us to see its face. Just slightly, just enough to let us know. It knew we were there. A horrible cold settled into my bones. I turned and bolted. Sam was right behind me. We sprinted through the hallway, past the empty hospital rooms and dark corridors. The sound of our footsteps filled the air, bouncing off the walls. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The figure hadn't moved, but its shadow had. It lunged forward, like something was peeling itself away from the body and coming after us. I choked back a scream. Keep running. Just keep running. We reached the stairwell and slammed through the door, the heavy metal rattling on its hinges. I fumbled with the lock. Click, locked it behind us. Sam bent over, gasping for air. I pressed my back against the door, my heart hammering. The cold feeling from before hadn't faded. My skin crawled like something was still watching. Sam finally spoke, voice hoarse. "What the hell was that?" I shook my head, my pulse still racing. "I don't know, but I swallowed. It saw us." We stared at each other, the weight of what just happened sinking in. I pulled out my phone. Another emergency alert had arrived. "You have been seen. Do not be alone. Do not look for reflections." The words made my stomach turn. I held it up for Sam to see. His face paled. "What the hell does that mean?" I turned the words over in my mind. "Do not be alone." That part was clear enough. But the last line, "Do not look for reflections," before I could think it through, a sound echoed from the other side of the door. A soft, dragging noise. Sam and I froze. Something was on the other side. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping my radio so hard my knuckles ached. I forced myself to breathe through my nose, slow and quiet. The dragging sound stopped. Silence. I cracked one eye open. Sam mouthed something. "Don't move." A shadow slipped under the door. I barely choked back a gasp. It was thin, almost like smoke, but it moved with purpose. It stretched across the floor, searching, feeling. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it could hear. The shadow lingered, then it retracted, pulled back under the door, and then, just like that, the presence was gone. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then Sam let out a shaky breath. What the hell was that? I didn't answer. Couldn't, because I still felt something wrong in the air, like we weren't alone. Not really. We stayed in that stairwell for what felt like an hour, too scared to move. Finally, Sam stood up, rubbing his face. We need answers. I nodded numbly. The police wouldn't help. The hospital staff wouldn't help. That left only one option. The security archives. Our live footage had erased itself, but maybe, just maybe, the older records still existed. Let's go, I said, standing. We made our way back through the hospital, avoiding empty hallways, avoiding reflections. I didn't know what would happen if I looked into a mirror, and I didn't want to find out. The security archive room was locked. Of course it was. I dug into my pocket, pulling out my keyring. My hands shook as I flipped through them. Not this one. Not this one. Sam kept watch, gripping his flashlight like a weapon. Finally, the right key. I shoved it into the lock and turned. Click. We slipped inside. The room was small and cluttered. Rows of old monitors, a wall of backup tapes. I moved to the nearest screen and started searching. Weeks of footage. Days of footage. I scrubbed back through the archives. I didn't even know what I was looking for, and then I found it. A recording from 3 nights ago. The hospital's main lobby. It showed a woman standing alone. She looked nervous, kept checking over her shoulder. First, nothing happened. Then the screen glitched. For a second, just a second, a figure appeared behind her. Tall. Wrong. And then the screen glitched again. The woman was gone. Not like she walked away. Not like she ran. Just gone. Like she had never been there at all. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew that feeling. I had seen that glitch before. That man in the parking lot. The missing footage. The thing in the hallway. It wasn't a coincidence. This was happening over and over, and no one was talking about it. I turned to Sam. How many people have disappeared? He didn't answer right away. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, too many. I swallowed. Then why aren't there more missing persons reports? Where are their families? Where are the news stories? Sam shook his head. I don't think people remember them. The words sent a shiver down my spine. I turned back to the monitor, staring at the empty lobby. A horrible thought formed in my mind. If we disappeared tonight, would anyone remember us? The old security monitor buzzed softly, casting an eerie glow across the small archive room. I couldn't stop staring at the screen. One moment, the woman had been there, standing in the hospital lobby, looking over her shoulder like she sensed something. The next moment, she was gone. Not walked away, not ran, just gone, like something had erased her. A heavy silence filled the air. Sam shifted beside me, his breathing shallow. That was 3 nights ago. I nodded, my mouth dry. She's not in any of the reports, he continued, almost like he was trying to make sense of it out loud. No alerts, no missing person flyers, no family looking for her. I clenched my jaw. It's like she never existed. Sam rubbed a hand over his face. Jesus. I turned back to the screen. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. 3 nights ago. She had been the last recorded disappearance. But if I dug deeper, if I went further back, I swallowed. I clicked through the archive files, scrolling past weeks of footage. Every few days, someone vanished. Not always in the same place. Sometimes in the hallways. Sometimes in the parking lot. One man was sitting in a waiting room when the screen glitched, and suddenly he wasn't there anymore. The pattern hit me all at once. Sam, I whispered. He looked at me, waiting. They were all alone. His eyes flickered between me and the screen. A sick realization washed over us. The emergency alerts. The warnings. Do not be alone. This wasn't random. This was a rule. Jesus Christ, Sam muttered. It only takes people when they're alone. I nodded, my throat tight. We both turned back to the screen, but I could barely focus. My mind raced. If this thing, whatever it was, only targeted people who were alone, then how many more had vanished before the security system caught it? How many people had been erased? The next thought hit me even harder. Had I ever known someone who disappeared? Had I ever passed an empty desk at work and not questioned why? Had I ever walked past an apartment with no memory of who lived there? The thought made my stomach churn. What if we were already forgetting people? The floor creaked. Sam and I both flinched, snapping our heads toward the sound. The archive room door was slightly ajar. The hallway outside was dark. For a second, I thought I saw something move, a shadow too long stretching the wrong way. Sam whispered, "Did you hear that?" I nodded, my pulse spiking. We had been so focused on the footage, we hadn't been listening. Slowly, I reached for the door handle. Sam grabbed my wrist, shook his head. He was right. We needed to be careful. I took a deep breath and switched to the security cameras. Pulled up the live feed. Hallway 2B clear. Main lobby empty. Parking lot nothing. I exhaled, barely realizing I had been holding my breath. But just as I moved to close the feed, the screen glitched for half a second, just long enough for me to see something. Something standing at the end of the hallway. I froze. The glitch faded. The figure was gone, but I knew it had been there, tall, still, watching. Sam's fingers dug into my sleeve. "You saw that too, right?" I nodded. "We weren't safe here. We had to go." The hospital was eerily quiet as we made our way toward the break room. It felt like the entire building was holding its breath. Sam walked beside me, never more than an inch away. We couldn't be alone, not for a second. The emergency alert had warned us. I kept glancing over my shoulder. The hallways were empty, but the air felt wrong, like something was just out of sight, like we were being watched. We reached the break room. I pushed the door open, and Sam slipped inside. Click. I locked it behind us. For the first time in hours, I felt a sliver of relief. The break room was small. A few chairs, a fridge, an old vending machine humming softly in the corner. But it was safe, at least for now. Sam slumped into a chair, rubbing his temples. "This is insane." I didn't respond. I was still staring at my phone, at the emergency alert. "Do not be alone. Do not look for reflections." That last part, the reflections, it made my skin crawl. I didn't want to test it, didn't even want to think about it. But the room had a microwave, a stainless steel microwave, with a reflective door. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Don't look. Don't look." I couldn't stop myself. I glanced at it. My reflection stared back, and then it blinked. I jumped back. My reflection hadn't just blinked. It had blinked wrong, like a bad frame in a corrupted video. A half-second delay. My breath caught in my throat. Sam frowned. "What's wrong?" I pointed at the microwave, my hands shaking. He followed my gaze, then immediately looked away. "You saw it too," I whispered. Sam's voice was tight. "Yeah." We didn't say anything for a long time. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Sam muttered, "What if it's not just reflections?" I turned to him, confused. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "What if it's us?" he said. "What if we're the ones glitching?" I shivered. I didn't want to think about it, but deep down I already knew the answer. We weren't supposed to see these things, and yet we had. What if the emergency alerts weren't just warnings? What if they were rules? Rules that kept people existing, because the ones who broke them, they disappeared. I tightened my grip on my phone. We had broken the rules. We had looked, and something had seen us. A sudden noise outside made both of us jump. A slow, deliberate knock. 1, 2, 3. Someone was outside the break room door. We weren't alone anymore, and I wasn't sure if that was a good thing. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the break room door. Sam and I froze. Neither of us spoke. Neither of us moved. The air felt thick, like the entire building was holding its breath. Knock, knock, knock. The knocks came again, exactly the same as before. My pulse thundered in my ears. I reached for Sam's arm. He met my gaze, his face pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. Neither of us moved toward the door. The security cameras hadn't shown anyone in the hall. The alerts had warned us not to be alone, and the reflection in the microwave had blinked wrong. Whatever was knocking, it wasn't someone we wanted to see. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't frantic. Whoever or whatever was on the other side was patient. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice into a whisper. "It knows we're in here."
Sam barely nodded.
The break room was small. 1 door. No windows, nowhere to go. I could feel the weight of my phone in my hand. The alerts, they had been right about everything so far. And now, the latest one whispered in the back of my mind, "Do not be alone. Do not look for reflections." I clenched my jaw. If the knocking thing wanted in, we couldn't stop it. We had to do something. Sam gestured toward the chairs. "If it comes in, He made a vague motion, like swinging a chair at something's head. Not a great plan, but better than nothing. I took a slow step back, toward the vending machine. Knock, knock, knock. Then a voice. Low, flat, wrong. "Hello." My breath caught in my throat. It didn't sound like a person. Not really. "Hello." The voice repeated itself. The exact same tone. The exact same rhythm. Like a recording. Like it didn't know what the words meant. Goosebumps crawled up my arms. Sam took a shaky breath, gripping the back of a chair. Ready to swing. I pressed myself against the vending machine, my heart hammering. We waited. The silence stretched on. Then the doorknob rattled. Somethingst. I fought the urge to shut my eyes. The knob turned. I expected it to stop. I expected the lock to hold. Didn't. Click. The door swung open. I barely choked back a scream. The hallway beyond was empty. There was no one there, no figure, no shadow, just the long stretch of fluorescent-lit corridor, flickering slightly. Sam and I didn't move. My legs trembled, but I forced myself to step forward. Just a little. I peered out into the hallway. Still empty. Sam whispered, "What the hell?" I turned back to him, shaking my head. I didn't know. Then movement. At the very end of the hallway, a shadow long and stretched the wrong way. And then a figure stepped into view. Person, or at least something shaped like one. My stomach dropped. It was wearing a hospital gown, bare feet, a thin, too long frame. But the worst part, its face. I couldn't see it. The overhead lights glitched the moment it stepped under them, flickering in and out, like reality itself was rejecting its presence. And for half a second, I saw something else. A distortion. A flicker of a different face. A different body. I had seen that flicker before. On the security footage. The people who disappeared. It had their faces. And then took a step toward us. Sam grabbed my sleeve. "We need to go." I didn't argue. We bolted. Back through the hallway. Past empty rooms and flickering lights. We had no plan. No idea where to go. We just ran. My lungs burned. My legs ached. Behind us, the air felt wrong. Not like footsteps. Not like someone chasing us. Just a pull. Like reality itself was unraveling behind us. We turned a corner and slammed into someone. I hit the ground hard. My vision blurred. A voice cursed. Not Sam's. Someone else. Shit. Who the hell? I looked up. A woman. She was wearing scrubs, her ID badge swinging on a lanyard. A nurse. My brain struggled to catch up. She was real. She wasn't one of those things. I could hear Sam gasping beside me, just as winded. The nurse blinked at us, clearly thrown. "Why are you two running?" Sam and I exchanged a look. We couldn't explain it. We couldn't even process it ourselves. But then, a soft knock echoed through the hallway behind us. "Knock, knock, knock." The nurse frowned. "What was that?" Sam grabbed her wrist. "Don't." His voice was desperate. "Don't go see. Don't be alone. Just..." He looked at me. "We need to get out of here." I nodded. I didn't care if we sounded insane. I didn't care if none of this made sense. We had to leave. The nurse hesitated, but something in our faces must have convinced her. She gave a sharp nod. "Okay." We didn't wait. We ran. We burst into the main lobby. The security desk was empty. The automatic doors stood just ahead, the exit. My phone buzzed. Another emergency alert. I ignored it. We ran straight through the doors, into the cold night air. The parking lot was empty. The hospital lights glowed behind us. I turned back once, just once, and for half a second, I thought I saw something standing at the glass doors, watching, waiting. But then the doors slid shut, and it was gone. We didn't stop running until we reached my car. I yanked open the door, breathless, heart hammering. Sam jumped into the passenger seat. The nurse hesitated just a second longer, then climbed into the back. I turned the key. The engine roared to life. We peeled out of the parking lot, leaving the hospital behind. My phone buzzed again. I finally looked. Emergency alert. If you have escaped, do not speak of it. Do not go back. Do not be alone. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. We had made it out, but something told me it wasn't over. The night swallowed us as we sped away from the hospital. Streetlights flickered past in a rhythmic blur, and the engine hummed beneath the tense silence. None of us spoke. None of us looked back. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. Sam sat rigid beside me, his face pale in the glow of passing headlights. In the rearview mirror, the nurse, Angela, according to her ID badge, shifted uneasily in the back seat. She hadn't asked questions. Not yet, but I could see it in her eyes. The disbelief, the confusion. I could feel it in my own chest. What the hell just happened? I glanced down at my phone, still buzzing in my lap. The emergency alert was still on the screen. If you have escaped, do not speak of it. Do not go back. Do not be alone. A cold weight settled in my stomach. Angela let out a slow, measured breath. Are you two going to explain? The streetlight ahead flickered out. The road went dark for half a second. And in that half second, I saw something in the rearview mirror. A shape in the back seat. Too long, too thin, sitting right beside Angela. And then the lights flickered back on. Angela was alone. I sucked in a sharp breath. Sam must have seen it too, because he whispered, "Drive faster." I pressed my foot down. We took the next exit, pulling into a gas station parking lot. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, humming against the quiet. We sat there for a moment, the car idling. I needed to think. Angela finally spoke. "Okay." Her voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the edge beneath it. "One of you needs to tell me what the hell is going on." She was trying to act calm, rational. She didn't know what we had seen. She didn't know what was still watching us. Sam ran a hand through his hair. "You wouldn't believe us." Angela let out a short, humorless laugh. "I just ran out of a hospital with two strangers because of something knocking on a door. Try me." I glanced at Sam. Then I turned back to Angela. I didn't even know where to start. The disappearances, the security footage, the emergency alerts, none of it made sense, and yet we had lived it. Angela folded her arms. "This isn't some stupid prank, right? Because if it is, you're both insane." Sam cut her off. "People are disappearing." She blinked. He took a shaky breath. "It takes people when they're alone. And when it does, it's like they never existed." Angela frowned. "What do you mean?" I finally spoke, my voice hollow. "I mean they're erased." Her expression flickered, something shifting in her gaze. Doubt, then realization, like something was clicking into place. She hesitated. Her brow furrowed. I leaned forward. "Angela, have you ever worked with someone who just stopped showing up?" Her breath caught. "Or walked into a room and felt like something was missing?" She swallowed. Her silence told me everything. She was remembering. The gas station lights buzzed. Angela finally whispered, "So the emergency alerts, they're real." I nodded. "They're rules," Sam muttered. The words settled like lead. Angela exhaled shakily. "I should call the police," she muttered. Or someone." My stomach clenched. I held up my phone. "That's what they want." Angela stared. I turned the screen toward her. "If you have escaped, do not speak of it. Do not go back. Do not be alone." "Why?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. The people in charge, the ones who sent these alerts, they knew what was happening. And they weren't stopping it. They were just trying to contain it. The gas station was mostly empty. A single car was parked by the pumps, its driver absent. A flickering neon sign read, "Open 24 hours." Inside, a bored-looking cashier scrolled through his phone behind the counter. Nothing about the scene felt safe. Nothing felt real. The world outside the car felt too still. Like if we stepped out, we'd slip into something we weren't meant to see. Angela cleared her throat. "So, what do we do now?" I didn't answer right away, because I didn't know. We had escaped, but for how long? My eyes flicked to Sam. He looked just as lost. And then, my phone buzzed. We all jumped. Another emergency alert. I held my breath and looked. Emergency alert. The rules have changed. Stay in groups of 3 or more. Do not speak about what you saw. Do not look at them. My stomach dropped. Angela leaned in. What does it say? I didn't answer. Sam grabbed his own phone. His face went pale. I got it too, he whispered. Angela pulled out her phone, unlocking it. Her brows knitted together. I didn't get anything. Sam and I locked eyes. Angela frowned. What does that mean? I didn't know, but a sick feeling crawled up my spine. If the emergency alerts were sent to people at risk, why hadn't she gotten one? The overhead lights buzzed louder. Too loud. Angela sat back, crossing her arms. So now what? We just sit in this car forever. Sam opened his mouth to respond. The gas station door creaked open. We all turned. A man stepped out. He looked normal, too normal. His movements were just slightly off. His steps too slow. His arms too stiff at his sides. His face was blank, expressionless. Angela whispered, "Do you know him?" I didn't, but I knew the look. I had seen it before, on the security cameras. The people who disappeared, they never came back. Not the same. The man's head turned toward us, and then he started walking, straight for our car. The man walked toward the car, not rushed, not hesitant, just steady. Something in my gut screamed wrong. Angela shifted in the back seat, gripping the headrest in front of her. Who the hell is that? Sam didn't answer. He didn't have to. I knew he wasn't real. Not anymore. The emergency alert still burned on my phone screen. Do not look at them. My hands tightened around the steering wheel. I forced myself to stare straight ahead. Not at him. Angela, though, wasn't listening. The hell is his problem? She muttered, leaning forward to get a better look. I reached back, grabbed her arm. Don't look. She flinched at the urgency in my voice, but the man was getting closer, and now I could hear it. Not footsteps, not the sound of shoes against pavement, just a faint buzzing, like the flickering hum of a broken street lamp. The man reached the front of the car, stopped. Then he leaned down. His face hovered just inches from the windshield. I saw it in my peripheral vision, saw his too wide smile, saw the way his eyes weren't right, like someone had forgotten what a person was supposed to look like. Angela let out a sharp breath. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. The buzzing got louder. The air felt thicker, like reality itself was bending around us. Then a tap on the glass, knuckles against the windshield, soft, almost gentle, like an invitation. I didn't move. Sam's breathing was shallow beside me. I could feel Angela shaking in the back seat. The man tapped again, and then, in the same wrong voice we had heard at the hospital. Hello, Angela gasped. My heart nearly stopped. She had looked. Shit. Angela recoiled, pressing herself against the back seat. His face. I squeezed my eyes shut even tighter. Too late. I could feel it, the air shifting, the buzzing deepening. Angela sucked in a sharp breath, her voice barely a whisper. He's not moving. I knew. I could feel him waiting. The buzzing had changed, becoming something almost rhythmic, like it was syncing with Angela's breath. I wanted to scream at her to shut her eyes, to stop looking, but then she made a noise, a small, choked noise, like something was pulling at her throat, like something was rewriting her. My stomach turned. Angela, I whispered. Close your eyes. She didn't respond. I forced myself to breathe. Think. Do not look at them. Stay in groups of 3 or more. The alerts were rules. Rules meant to keep us alive. Angela had broken one. I had to fix it. I reached blindly behind me, fumbling for her arm. Her skin was ice cold. I grabbed her wrist and squeezed. Hard. Angela. The buzzing shuddered, like something had glitched. Angela let out a sharp breath, gasping like she had just come up for air. I felt her jerk away, curling in on herself. I still didn't look, but I could hear her shaking. I didn't mean to. Her voice was raw, frantic. The buzzing outside the car shifted. The tapping on the windshield stopped. Then soft footsteps, moving away. And just like that, the air snapped back to normal. I opened my eyes. The man was gone. The gas station looked the same. The streetlights flickered. The night hummed with distant traffic, like nothing had happened. Angela sat frozen in the back seat, her breathing still uneven. I turned to face her. Her eyes were too wide. Her hands gripped her arms so tightly her knuckles were white. I spoke carefully. "Are you okay?" She nodded. But she was lying. She had seen something. I didn't ask what. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Sam exhaled slowly. "We need to go." I didn't argue. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the lot. None of us looked back. The road stretched ahead, dark and empty. No streetlights, no signs, just the quiet hum of the engine and Angela's shaking breath. I checked the rearview mirror. She was staring at her hands, like she didn't recognize them. I gripped the wheel. "Angela," she whispered something. I barely heard it, but it sent ice down my spine. "What's my last name?" Silence. I glanced at Sam. His face was unreadable. Angela lifted her head slowly. Her expression was blank. She looked at me through the mirror, and for the first time I saw it. A flicker. For half a second, just half a second, her face wasn't her face. Like a static glitch. Like something was trying to remember who she was supposed to be. I sucked in a breath. Sam whispered, "She didn't get the alert." I gripped the wheel tighter. Because he was right. Angela never got the emergency alert. Because Angela wasn't in danger. Not anymore. Because it had already taken her. The air in the car changed. The quiet wasn't normal anymore. It was watching. Angela shifted in the back seat, tilting her head slightly, like she had just realized something, like she was seeing us for the first time. My pulse hammered in my throat. Angela, or what was left of her, smiled, and in a voice that wasn't quite hers, she whispered, "Where are we going?" The words settled in the car like a thick fog. "Where are we going?" Angela's voice was wrong. Not completely different, just slightly off, like a recording that had been played one too many times. I forced myself to keep my eyes on the road. This wasn't Angela anymore. Not really. Sam sat stiff beside me. He had heard it too. I knew we were thinking the same thing. We weren't alone. Not in the way that mattered. Angela, ***, or whatever she had become, ***, was still in the back seat, watching, waiting. My phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. Slowly, carefully, I glanced down at the screen. Another emergency alert. Emergency alert. Final protocol in effect. Do not acknowledge them. Do not respond. Do not be alone. A cold weight settled in my stomach. I turned the phone slightly toward Sam. He looked. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Angela leaned forward suddenly, too close. She rested her arms on the front seat, tilting her head. "What's wrong?" she asked. I gritted my teeth. She was waiting for a response. I couldn't give her one. Not if I wanted to live. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sam shifted beside me, carefully avoiding eye contact. "Angela, ***, no," the thing pretending to be her, ***, smiled. "Did I do something wrong?" she whispered. I focused on the road. Sam didn't move. A silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Then she laughed. It was soft, almost amused, like she had figured something out. My pulse hammered in my throat. Angela sat back. "That's okay," she murmured. "You don't have to talk." She folded her hands in her lap, her fingers twitching. "I'll just wait." We drove for miles. None of us spoke. The road stretched ahead, endless and empty, like we weren't going anywhere, like the world had somehow shifted. The radio crackled with static. Streetlights flickered past. Angela sat still, too still, not shifting, not breathing, just waiting. I wanted to scream, but I knew better. Do not acknowledge them. My throat burned with unspoken words. Sam's leg bounced rapidly, his hands gripping his knees. I could tell he was close to breaking. Angela sighed. "You guys are boring," she muttered. Then she started humming, a slow, tuneless hum, like a song that had been forgotten, a noise that itched in the back of my skull. I wanted to cover my ears, but I didn't. I just kept driving. Angela's voice lilted through the car, soft and lilting. Something about it felt wrong, like it was wrapping around me, trying to settle into my bones. Then the headlights flickered. The world outside the car shimmered. For half a second, I saw something in the rearview mirror, Angela's reflection, but her face wasn't her face. It was blurred, like something shifting beneath the surface, like she was trying to remember who she was supposed to be. Then the headlights came back. The road was empty again. Angela stopped humming. and in a voice that sounded too much like mine, she whispered, "You're alone now." The engine died. The car rolled to a stop. My stomach plummeted. The world outside was pitch black. No streetlights, no moon, just darkness, like the road had simply ended. Sam let out a shaky breath. I reached for the keys, twisting them hard. Nothing. The car wouldn't start. I checked my phone. No signal. The screen flickered. Then, emergency alert. No further updates. My blood ran cold. Sam clenched his jaw. Angela giggled. Oh, she whispered. Sam moved first. He threw the door open, lunging out into the darkness. I didn't think, I just followed. The second my feet hit the pavement, I slammed the door shut behind me. I turned. Through the window, Angela sat in the back seat. Smiling, she raised a hand and waved. I swallowed thickly. The emergency alert had been clear. Do not be alone. Sam and I were still together. We weren't alone. Not yet. But Angela... the thing wearing her face. Was still inside the car. Was she alone? Did she count? I wasn't sure, and I wasn't going to find out. I turned to Sam. Run. We bolted. The world around us was black, featureless, like reality itself had thinned. My legs ached. My lungs burned. Sam was just ahead, his breath coming in short bursts. Then he stopped. I nearly slammed into him. What the hell? My words died, because in front of us, the road was gone. A sheer drop, a gaping abyss stretching into nothing. Sam's breathing turned ragged. I turned around. Angela stood a few feet away, still smiling, still watching. But now she wasn't alone. Shapes flickered in the dark. Too tall, too thin, buzzing like broken neon signs. A dozen of them. 100. Angela tilted her head. Game over, she whispered. Then they moved. Sam grabbed my arm. I grabbed his. Neither of us let go. Because if we did, we would be alone. The figures surged forward. The buzzing filled my skull. My vision blurred. I squeezed my eyes shut and let the darkness take me. I woke up on the side of the road. A highway. Cars sped past in the distance. The sun was rising. Sam lay beside me, unconscious, but he was still there, still real. I sat up slowly, my body aching. I checked my phone. No new alerts, no missed calls, just a single notification. Emergency alert. No further updates. I looked around. The car was gone. Angela was gone. Everything that had happened, gone. Sam stirred beside me. His eyes fluttered open. He stared at me, dazed. For a moment, we just sat there. Then he whispered, "Was any of that real?" I didn't answer. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. But deep down, I did know one thing. We had made it, barely, but not everyone had.